Han har just haft premiär på en lång dags färd mot natt på Dramaten. Och han har jagat Olof Palmes mördare i den senaste Sundvall-filmen. Det är alltså Mikael Persbrandt. Möt honom i På tu man hand på lördag 6:15 på kvällen.
På fredag i Leva livet så kommer Eva Rödberg
yes, I do. Och Josefin Nilsson och Einbusk.
Ja, visst. Och så kommer Karl Dyal, Kalle.
Wow. Och vår programledare Ann-Sofie Carringer. Yes. Wow. That's yeah.
Titta då.
Absolut.
Livet, det kan ju också vara att få påta i sin egen trädgård, populärt så här års. Och därför ska vi nu prova årets första räddisor. Vi ska gå på trädgårdsmästarkurs och följa med till ett återuppväckt paradis i Gröna rum.
Människans bästa vän är hästen. Ja, i alla fall när det gäller att få grönsaker tidigt på säsongen. Den här varmbänken, den fylldes för mer än en månad sedan med 1/2 meter hästgödsel, boklöv och jord. Och sticker man ner handen i jorden idag så är det faktiskt riktigt varmt här nere. Och det är nästan ångar om jorden. Det är den här nedbrytningsprocessen som skapar värme och som gör att man kan sätta förkultiverade grönsaker och potatis mycket tidigt på säsongen. Den här potatisen den planterades ut för 3 veckor sedan bara och den har redan kupats en gång och den kommer att behöva kupas igen innan den kan skördas. De här knepen, hur man får grönsaker tidigt, lär man ut på en slottsträdgårdsmästarkurs här på Sofiero. Och Ulrich Neuhaus är entusiastisk kursledare.
Och där kan man ta frö för frö och det finns till sådana sålådarna.
Det börjar redan i januari i växthuset. Då sås de första grönsakerna och kursdeltagarna får lära sig allt om såteknik. Efter bara några veckor här så ska sedan vissa av plantorna vidare ut i varmbänkarna.
Enklaste är egentligen sallad, olika saladsorterna, spinat, radisa och i viss mån kan man börja också med kohlrabi. Det är grönsaker som blir ganska hastigt färdigt.
Men hur mycket vinner man i tid på att börja då?
Ja, alltså vi har ju skördefest omkring den 1 maj. Och det är inte allt som är klart, och det är inte ekonomiskt klart om man betraktar det så. Men det är ändå klart, man kan skörda potatis, man kan eventuellt smaka en jordgubb.
Under dagen täcks bänkfönsterna med fiberduk för att höja temperaturen några grader. Och inför natten rullas vassmattor ut för att skydda mot kylan. Här under växer nu grönsakerna så det knakar. Och redan den 1 maj är det skördefest för de nyutbildade slottsträdgårdsmästarna. Att odla på det här sättet är inte bara av nostalgiska skäl som man gör det. Utan det är också ett sätt att hålla liv i gamla välbeprövade arbetsmetoder. Nu ska vi tillbaka till Heligan i sydvästra England. Där stannade tiden nästan när första världskriget bröt ut. Den stora, vackra egendomens trädgård övergavs när trädgårdsmästare och andra anställda tvingades ut i krig. I nästan 70 år vilade trädgården. Ja, den försvann nästan i sly och ris. Men 1991 då startade ett enormt restaureringsprojekt för att väcka Helgans trädgård till liv igen. Och i det här avsnittet får vi se när man tar sig an den gamla köksträdgården.
If I was in a time machine and I had the option to change places with the head gardener of 1880, I think I would change because there were so many new things happening then. and I think it would have been a time of great excitement. Victorian England was at its height, and people were investing a lot of money in their gardens, trying out new techniques, keeping the house running with produce from the productive gardens, and things were going ahead full steam. England was on a high and going well. Height of the empire.
De här 4 tunnlandens köksträdgård, det är Heligans maskinrum. Vid sekelskiftet försåg den familjen Tremaine och alla anställda med vad de behövde för att överleva. Nu är det den enda helt återställda muromgärdade trädgården i England. Blomsterträdgården den gav snittblommor och grönsaker och raden av växthus, exotiska frukter. Från grönsaksträdgården där skördades baslivsmedel året runt. Och här krävdes också den största arbetsinsatsen. 18 av de 22 trädgårdsmästarna på Heligan jobbade här. Idag finns det bara 6. Här emellan ligger melongården med drivbänkar och vinrankor. Under viktoriansk tid hade chefsträdgårdsmästaren det övergripande ansvaret här. Det var ett av de mest prestigefyllda jobb en man ur arbetarklassen kunde få. Philip Macmillan Browse har det jobbet idag och han måste lista ut sina föregångares hemligheter. Till exempel hur de odlade ananas så här långt norr om ekvatorn, utan växthusvärme dessutom.
See, that's not bad. We've got 8 in now in 20 minutes and we only had about 1 in 12 minutes, didn't we? And put 4 in a row and give them wider spacing.
So we have aisles, in other words?
Yes.
Okay, we could do that.
Som alla chefsträdgårdsmästare undviker Philip att smutsa ner sig. Hans förman, Tom Petherick, får göra jobbet.
The complexities of what a head gardener would have had to face with the actual guy who had to get in and do it. I mean, there is a limit to whether you could physically get in there or not. So the guy who's going to run it is going to put it to the spacing that he can get away with. And yet the head gardener, he's going to say, shove them up. So they're forever probably behind one another's backs, compromising all the time. I think that's going to be the answer.
Yeah, I think so.
Det här arbetet är inte bara en övning i nostalgi. Målet är att exakt återge de gamla trädgårdsmästarnas arbetssätt.
When you think of how fast this operation has developed in the whole gardens, we are achieving things at really quite a phenomenal rate and learning very fast. Our learning curve of everybody who works in the gardens, whoever the gardeners are, their learning curves have been enormously steep. Because it doesn't matter how much you think you know about gardening, we knew nothing about Victorian gardening. We had to put ourselves in the position of being Victorian.
1991 när trädgården återuppväcktes var allt helt förfallet. Så innan man kunde leka viktorianer var man tvungen att bygga upp allt från början.
When we first came into the melon yard, you just saw these and thought they were frames, and nobody had any idea that they particularly were pineapple pits at the time, and they were totally derelict. But the most impressive thing I remember is that about 2/3 of the way down here in the manure pit on that side was an ash tree, and one of the major efforts of this restoration was not rebuilding the frame, it was actually getting this huge ash bowl out in the first instance. And I look back on that and think that sort of thing was the major achievement of the restoration. Building it up and putting it right afterwards was chicken feed compared with some of the original recovery work that had to be done.
De gamla trädgårdsmästarna på Heligan var pionjärer inom sitt yrke. En ananas härifrån kunde väga så mycket som 9 kilo. Och med tanke på att den enda värmen kom från hästgödsel var det ett smärre mirakel.
This is probably the oldest method of growing pineapples that would have been used, and I suspect that this is the only pineapple pit heated in this way that's extant in Great Britain at the moment. We're heating it with the hotbeds, which go through this divided wall, this hollow wall. Heat goes in at the bottom, rises, and then comes into the frame through the pigeonholes at the back and the front. In the old days, they would have used stable manure. because it's got a lot of urine in it, it's got a lot of nitrogen in it. So consequently, it'll fire up. That is, it'll start to heat up and ferment very quickly. You want it to give a consistent heat for as long as possible. If we prevent them going blue this winter, I think we've got a chance of having our earliest crop probably about next June, we think, don't we, Tom?
I think so.
We'll close these things down and we'll feed them before we close them down. And then hopefully we won't have to do a lot more until about next early March. I think we've got it cracked now, haven't we, Tom?
We have.
This is the exciting part. We're learning all this. You can't read this in books.
Det är mitt i kalla vintern, men precis som på familjen Tremaines tid så har grönsaksträdgården producerat tillräckligt för att föda en armé. Ett tillskott från stranden bidrar till det. Och precis som den viktorianska förmannen så jobbar Tom Petherick sida vid sida med sin personal.
Well, this is Portmelon Beach, where we come regularly to collect seaweed. And it's good conditions, really, because there's a half a southerly gale blowing, and that blows right in here and brings the seaweed, well, not up as far the beach as I'd like it, but still, there is plenty of seaweed around. And we should be able to fill our tractor and trailer, get it back to the gardens by lunchtime. We use it for a number of things, mulching, for making compost. Very labour intensive, takes a long time, but the benefits are there. It's adding organic matter, medium, which is ideal for plant growth. I feel that the Victorians were particularly adept at building up levels of soil fertility, which is something that we noticed when we first came in to the productive gardens, that the vegetable garden in particular had very, very deep topsoil, a topsoil that went down to about 8-9 inches, which is, I think, one of the reasons we've had such success in growing vegetables in that veg garden. The head gardener had to extend the season in order to please the house, and of course it was great. It was a great benefit to the host to be able to, bring things into the dining room that his guests mightn't see if they lived in another part of the country, especially in the north of England. So these are our sea kale beds, and we're playing around with nature here a bit. We're trying to force them, not out of season, but we're trying to wake them up from their winter dormancy, so they give us an early spring crop. By putting the lids over and the pots, we're getting, we hope to get nice blanched shoots by cutting out the light. And these will be much sweeter than they would if they were a normal green colour. They're from the brassica family, and they're tough, leathery old leaves and not particularly flavoursome. But when they're white and blanched, they're very sweet. What this does mean is that they lose quite a lot of their vitamins because they have no chlorophyll in them. So they're lacking in I think it's A and C, but they are very sweet, and they were a typical Victorian crop. They're not seen much these days. And we hope to get something by the early spring, when the soil temperatures warm up a bit, with the help of this insulation from the straw. So with a bit of luck, we'll get something fairly good. It's now time to see whether we've got any and whether it's nice and white, as it should be. That's just how it should be. Very pale, creamy colour, not much leaf. You see it's going out towards the light. Hasn't put on any leaf growth at all because it can't see the light, so it stays white. And this is the bit you eat. Don't tend to eat that bit, although you can. But that's the bit you eat. And it's steamed or boiled lightly, and it's quite sweet, very tender, and well worth all this trouble. And if you do have these forcing pots, an old bucket will do. I mean, you can use anything as long as you keep the light out, just let in a crack so it can just grow a bit. That's the secret. That's just how we wanted it to end up. It's perfect.
One of the things about starting into a project like this is I wouldn't have come into it if I hadn't wanted to do it in the first place. So discovering what would have been grown by a Victorian head gardener has been an interesting intellectual and academic exercise by just reading every bit of book I can lay my hands on to find out what they would be thinking about, what would they be growing. That's been interesting. Then, of course, the sheer fact that then we were faced with the practicalities of producing a garden which you wanted to have period-correct vegetables in. So that then necessitated me actually trying to source all the material I wanted. There aren't many varieties out there that I would now particularly want. Surprising how quickly in 3 years you can put together, I suppose we're growing 180 varieties of vegetables from seed. These are the seeds of the vegetables and flowers that we use in the garden currently. The complete collection, more or less, of all the seeds that we're going to use during the course of the year. There is no historical archive concerning what was grown at Heligan at all. So it comes back to the situation that we've had to adopt, or I've had to adopt all the time, is to put myself in the position of being the head gardener and saying, okay, what would I have grown? So I've done that. What's happened is that I probably found more varieties than I expected to, which probably means that we grow a greater range of varieties than the head gardener might have done, say, in 1900.
Well, these are second early potatoes, which we would like to have got in a couple of weeks ago if we could, but the weather hasn't been favourable. So it's a bit behind. It's not the end of the world. Although, what are we now? Almost end of March. It's not late for these, but we would like to have got them in earlier.
These are all the varieties of first early and second early potatoes and salad potatoes that we've still got to put in. How quickly they're going to sprout, I'm not sure. All these potatoes have been chitted. That is, that they've been stood on their ends and stood in the fruit room for a while, for 2 or 3 months, in order to produce shoots. And the varieties that we're growing, we've got, of these earlies, first earlies and salads, something of the order of 15 or 16 varieties, all of which are period correct. That is pre-1910, and they're the sort of varieties that Victorian Edwardian head gardeners would have used. Well, I'd never seen these before. There's a variety called Salad Red and a variety called Salad Blue. You can see how blue the shoots are, and in fact, you can just about see how dark the skin is, even if you can't see it's blue. But what's interesting about it is that when you cut it, look at that, bluey purple flesh, and the other one's got, here's Salad Red. Doesn't look too happy on the end there, does it? But you can see the colour. I mean, the Victorians were always exploring everything. They wanted to try everything. They were that sort of people. So yes, they would have had pink-skinned, pink-fleshed, blue-skinned, white-fleshed, white-skinned, yellow-fleshed, yellow-skinned.
We're in the tool shed, which was the original tool shed, but now acts as our museum, where we store a lot of the old tools that might have been used in the garden, some of which were found here, others of which were donations. And this is the prize one, which is a collection of 12 grape storing bottles, some of which have the original charcoal in it, which was used to purify the water. The bottle was filled up, and the grapes, with a long woody stem, put in the funnel at the end, and they kept them fresh for weeks, possibly even longer. So hence the stories of grapes at Christmas, and which is when they would have been a great party piece. Terracotta pot lifters. Never see them these days. And you can tighten up the chain for the size of your pot. So 2 people could lift large pots of ferns or shrubs or whatever they had in them. And what we've got here is a seed drill, which dates from about 1880 probably. It's made in Wiltshire, Bratton in Wiltshire. And you can see inside it has a brush. And when you fill this with seed, as you turn the wheels, the brush brushes the seed down through the spout here, the front of which has created the furrow for you. And you can regulate the size of your seed by moving the latch up and down. And we're just about to restore this one. And we'll take it down to Norman, see what he can do with it. Would have been used to sow anything from peas, not tiny seed, but I think from peas up through beans. We got this thing, which we need to fix up as best we can for the museum. I wouldn't consider using something of this complexity anymore. Yeah, it's a little bit over the top. Take out a seed drill, walking up and down on boards in seconds flat, whereas this needs maintenance and costs a fortune to have these regularly serviced and maintained.
The rotational sequence in here, which we have over a couple of years more or less worked out a standard cropping program for the vegetable garden now. We know what's going where, what spacing it's going at, and basically what varieties we'll use. The head gardener would have made the decisions about the balance of what was going to be grown and what was going to grow where, because it was his responsibility to keep the kitchens going in the house. And the foreman was the one who actually implemented things on the ground in general. However, I am sure that in those days, like it would be today, that there would have been a certain amount of discussion between the foreman and the head gardener about what was practical to do. Don't you think, Tom?
Yes, and that's how it is today, isn't it? We discuss together. Philip's actually done the plan and does the rotational plan, and I carry out the tasks and modify it as and when is necessary.
One of the other things that we're very keen on and tended to be laughing about in the early stages when we started this garden was the regimentation and exactitude with which we plant things out. That was how the Victorians did it. When the plants came up, you expected them to stand there like little rows of guardsmen and salute, and not be at an angle or one row closer than another. And now it's second nature to everybody that they understand that if the rows, say, 18 inches apart, rows are 18 inches apart. If they have to be thinned to 6 inches apart, they are thinned to 6 inches apart. That's what we mean by day-to-day implementation of things, don't we?
Yes.
I'm thinning parsnips here. I'm thinning them to about 3 inches. Those will grow on, and then in a few months' time we'll actually thin them to about 6 inches. They'll actually grow at that. There is more mind-numbingly boring jobs in this garden, but this isn't a bad job, actually. There's far worse jobs than this. So obviously, but I don't say it is a really brilliant job, otherwise I'll be doing it all the time and it would be boring. This will go in the compost heap and it'll add the fertility for the soil in next season. But it isn't a waste, really, because maybe a waste in terms of labour, but there again you get a perfect row this method. You get a parsnip every 6 inches and it looks good. And this garden is for show.
Sowing broad beans today, a double row, about 80 foot long. Kind of straightforward process, really. They didn't have means of preserving food as we do these days. And so therefore food that dries and stores well was an important part of the winter diet. And peas and beans, which do both, and therefore were a very versatile crop. But you see, the thing is that these days the different types of pea and bean have improved so much. I mean, you know what a packet of bird's eye peas tastes like? They're really good. They're sweet, small, very juicy. The olden time peas are great big fat bullets that taste nothing at all. And I think it's the same with a lot of the broad beans too. But we've picked ones that we feel illustrate the successional cropping, sort of an autumn sown crop, and an early season crop and a late season crop.
A new season is always a challenge because you don't know what's going to happen. What I would like is to be sure that the rotational sequence that I've tried to establish and plan really is working properly. Last year was the first year of its operation. It's very easy to run before you can walk if you're not careful and keep on having new horizons, new ambitions of where you're going to move on to. But horticulturally, every so often you just have to stand back and say, let's get everything sorted and make sure we haven't missed out on anything. It's important to do it, otherwise the thing doesn't work. Then that takes time. That takes a whole year of sequences, seasonal sequences.
Under sommaren förväntas blomsterträdgården producera en oavbruten ström snittblommor. Och om allt går som det ska mognar den första ananasen i augusti. Sammanlagt blir det en jättestor skörd som behöver någonstans att ta vägen. Nu när det inte finns något stort hushåll att försörja längre. Nästa vecka så räknar vi med att snön har smält på Åke Trudssons djupsängar. För då ska vi ut och så vårens första grönsaker utomhus. Hej då!
När det första rasupploppet i Sverige utbryter prövas de välmenande åsikterna. Myndigheterna ingriper för att öka integrationen mellan svenskar och invandrare. Biskop Caroline Krok, Café Opera-chefen Sandro Catenacci, Kent Härstedt och debattören Marseille Saremba ställs inför ett dilemma när de ska rädda ett splittrat Malmö.
Carl Hamilton, Dilemma, onsdag.
22:10 i tvåan där man också sist ikväll visar programmet om 20-årsjubilerande slagverksensemblen Kromata. 23:10 börjar det. Här är ettan när som helst aktuellt. Först bara bilder ur ännu ett omskakande dokument utifrån.
De har många människors lidande och död på sina samveten.
I did terrible things. I did terrible things to members of the ANC.
Nu får de möta sina offer öga mot öga. Men inte för att straffas. I utbyte mot sanningen erbjuds mördarna amnesti. Dokument utifrån på fredag om den sydafrikanska sanningskommissionens försök att hela nationen trots att mördarna tillåts köpslå med rättvisan.